Let's get right into this because what's happening in Florida is genuinely shocking, and Governor DeSantis is reportedly losing it behind closed doors as the housing market collapses around him. We're not talking about a minor correction. We're not talking about a cooling market. We're talking about housing prices in some Florida markets crashing to 10-year lows, and the political and economic implications are massive. Let's start with the numbers because they're absolutely devastating. In multiple Florida markets, home prices have dropped to levels we haven't seen since 2014 or 2015. In some areas of Tampa, median home prices are down over 20% from their peak. Parts of Jacksonville have seen similar drops. Even in Miami, which has been one of the hottest markets in the country, prices are falling and inventory is piling up. Orlando, Fort Myers, Naples, across the state, we're seeing the same pattern. Prices dropping, sales plummeting, inventory skyrocketing, and buyers completely disappearing. This is not what DeSantis has been telling people. For years, he's been selling Florida as this incredible success story, this place where everyone wants to live, where the economy is booming, where property values are soaring. He built his entire political brand on the Florida model. He ran for president on it. He's constantly comparing Florida to states like California and New York, claiming that people are fleeing those places to come to his free state of Florida. But the housing market is exposing that narrative as fundamentally false. Here's what's really happening. The Florida housing market went absolutely crazy during the pandemic and in the years following. Prices skyrocketed. People were paying way over asking price. Bidding wars were common. Investors were buying up everything. It looked like the party would never end. DeSantis took credit for all of it, claiming his policies made Florida the most desirable place in America. But what goes up must come down, and when markets get overheated like Florida's did, the correction is often brutal. The crash is being driven by multiple factors, and every single one of them ties back to policy failures by DeSantis and the Florida legislature. Let's go through them. First, and this is huge, the insurance crisis. Homeowners insurance in Florida has become either impossibly expensive or completely unavailable. We're talking about insurance premiums that have tripled or quadrupled in just a couple years. Homeowners who were paying $4,000 a year are now being quoted $12,000 or $15,000 or more. Major insurance companies have completely pulled out of the state. Now, why does this matter for home prices? Because if you can't get affordable insurance, you can't get a mortgage. And if you can't get a mortgage, you can't buy a house. So the pool of potential buyers has shrunk dramatically. The only people who can buy homes in many Florida markets now are cash buyers who can afford to self-insure or wealthy people for whom insurance costs are a minor annoyance. Regular working families who need mortgages are being priced out entirely. This is devastating the market because the majority of home buyers need financing. When you eliminate most of the potential buyer pool, prices have to fall. It's basic supply and demand. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Homes are sitting on the market for months. Sellers are dropping prices repeatedly trying to attract buyers. And even at reduced prices, homes aren't selling because people can't afford the total cost of ownership when insurance is $15,000 a year on top of a mortgage payment. Second factor, property taxes. As home values increased over the past few years, so did property tax bills, even with Florida's homestead exemption. And now local governments across Florida are raising millage rates because they need revenue for infrastructure, hurricane recovery, and all the costs associated with rapid population growth. So homeowners are getting hit with higher property tax bills at the same time insurance is skyrocketing. The total cost of owning a home in Florida has become prohibitive, and that's making Florida properties less attractive to buyers. Third factor, climate risk is becoming impossible to ignore. For years, DeSantis has downplayed or outright denied climate change. He's banned state agencies from using the term. He's rolled back environmental protections. He's approved massive development in vulnerable coastal areas and flood zones. But reality doesn't care about political ideology. Sea levels are rising. Hurricanes are getting stronger. Flooding is getting worse. And buyers are starting to factor this into their decisions. Why would you pay top dollar for property in a flood zone that might be underwater in 20 years? Why would you buy a coastal home that faces increasing hurricane risk? Buyers, especially younger buyers who are thinking long-term, are looking at Florida properties and deciding the risk isn't worth it. And this is putting downward pressure on prices, especially in the most vulnerable areas. Fourth factor, interest rates. When rates were near zero during the pandemic, people could afford much more expensive homes because the monthly payment was manageable. But as rates have gone up, affordability has collapsed. A home that cost $4,000 a month at 3% interest now costs $6,000 a month at 7% interest. That prices out a huge portion of buyers. And in Florida, where home prices got so inflated, the combination of high prices and high rates has made homeownership unaffordable for most people. Fifth factor, investor exodus. During the boom, investors, both individual and institutional, bought up huge amounts of Florida property. They were betting on continued appreciation and strong rental income. But now, many of those investors are looking to exit. Property values are falling. Insurance costs are eating into returns. Some areas are seeing rental demand soften. And investors are trying to sell, which is flooding the market with inventory and putting even more downward pressure on prices. Sixth factor, and this one is huge, people are leaving Florida. For years, we heard about people moving to Florida in droves. And yes, population was growing. But what DeSantis didn't talk about is that a lot of people were also leaving. And now, with the insurance crisis, high cost of living, climate concerns, and political controversies, more people are deciding Florida isn't worth it. When you have more people trying to sell than people trying to buy, prices crash. And that's exactly what's happening in many Florida markets. Now, let's talk about DeSantis' response, because this is where it gets really interesting. Publicly, he's still trying to maintain the narrative that everything is fine, that Florida's economy is strong, that people love living here. But according to reports from people close to him, he's privately furious and panicking. He knows that a collapsing housing market undermines everything he's been saying. He knows it makes him look like a failure. He knows it threatens his political future. And what has he done to address it? Basically nothing effective. He's tried to blame federal policy. He's tried to blame people moving to Florida, claiming the market got overheated because Florida is so desirable. He's tried to spin the crash as a correction that will make housing more affordable, which is technically true, but completely ignores the fact that people who bought at the peak are now underwater and losing everything. What he hasn't done is address the actual problems. He hasn't taken serious action on the insurance crisis. He hasn't acknowledged climate change or implemented real adaptation measures. He hasn't stopped approving vulnerable development. He hasn't provided real relief for homeowners struggling with insurance costs. He's stuck in his ideological position that government shouldn't intervene in markets, even as the market is collapsing and destroying people's lives. The political implications are massive. DeSantis built his brand on Florida's success. The housing boom was a big part of that narrative. Now the bust is exposing him as either incompetent or dishonest or both. Homeowners who voted for him, who believe his promises, are watching their property values tank and their insurance costs skyrocket, and they're angry. They're realizing that his policies didn't protect them. They actually made things worse. Real estate agents across Florida are reporting that the market feels dead. Open houses that would have had dozens of people showing up now have maybe one or two. Homes that would have sold in days are sitting for months. Sellers are getting desperate, dropping prices again and again. And even at reduced prices, buyers aren't biting because they're either waiting for prices to fall further or they simply can't qualify for mortgages when insurance costs are factored in. Let's talk about what this means for different groups of people. For homeowners who bought at the peak, this is catastrophic. If you bought a home in 2021 or 2022 at inflated prices, you might now owe more than your home is worth. You're underwater on your mortgage. If you need to sell for any reason, job loss, divorce, health issues, you can't. You're trapped. And if you try to sell, you're taking a massive loss that could wipe out all your savings and then some. For retirees who move to Florida, this is devastating. A lot of people retire to Florida thinking their home would be their biggest asset, something they could downsize from later or leave to their kids. Now they're watching the equity evaporate while their insurance and property tax costs skyrocket. Some are in situations where they can't afford to stay, but also can't afford to leave because they can't sell for enough to pay off their mortgage and move somewhere else. For young families trying to buy their first home, this crash should theoretically make things more affordable. And in some ways it does. Prices are down. But the problem is the total cost of ownership is still incredibly high because of insurance. So even though home prices have fallen, many first-time buyers still can't afford to buy in Florida because they can't afford the insurance on top of a mortgage payment. For the Florida economy as a whole, this is extremely problematic. Real estate and construction are huge parts of Florida's economy. When housing crashes, it ripples through everything. Construction workers lose jobs. Real estate agents make less money. Mortgage brokers and title companies see business dry up. Home improvement stores and contractors see demand fall. Local governments see property tax revenue decline. It creates a negative feedback loop that can drag down the entire state economy. And here's the thing that should terrify DeSantis. This crash is exposing all the problems he's been ignoring or denying. The insurance crisis that he downplayed is now undeniable. The climate risks he refused to acknowledge are now obvious to anyone paying attention. The overdevelopment he encouraged is now revealed as unsustainable. The market solves everything ideology he championed is now shown to be inadequate when dealing with complex, systemic problems. What should DeSantis do? He should take the insurance crisis seriously and pursue real reforms that actually help homeowners, not just insurance companies. He should acknowledge climate reality and implement serious adaptation and mitigation measures. He should restrict development in the most vulnerable areas. He should provide real assistance to homeowners who are struggling. He should admit that his previous approach wasn't working and change course. Will he do any of that? Based on his track record, probably not. He's too invested in his ideological positions and his political narrative to make the kind of dramatic changes that are needed. So the crash will likely continue. More Floridians will be hurt, and DeSantis will keep trying to spin and deflect and blame anyone but himself. For people watching this who own property in Florida or are thinking about buying, you need to understand what's happening and make informed decisions. If you own a home in Florida, you need to be realistic about your situation. What's your home actually worth today? Not what Zillow said 2 years ago. Can you afford the insurance and property taxes? If you need to sell, can you get enough to pay off your mortgage? Don't make decisions based on hope that the market will recover quickly. It might not. If you're thinking about buying in Florida, be very careful. Yes, prices are down from the peak, which looks attractive, but make sure you understand the total cost of ownership, especially insurance. Make sure you understand the climate risks. Make sure you're not catching a falling knife by buying something that's going to keep dropping in value. And make sure you're not buying based on DeSantis' sales pitch about Florida being amazing. Look at the actual data, the actual risks, the actual costs.